Welcome to a story that would shake the very foundations of American politics in 1884. A tale of power, deception, and a woman whose life would be forever changed by her encounter with a man destined for the presidency. This is the story of Grover Cleveland and the scandal that nearly derailed his path to the White House. I'm your host, Oz Dalton, and welcome to American Scandal Report. Picture Buffalo, New York, in the 1870s. A bustling industrial city where fortunes were made and reputations could be destroyed overnight. In this world lived a man who would become known for his integrity in public life, yet whose private affairs told a dramatically different story. Grover Cleveland was building his political career, serving as sheriff of Erie County, but those who knew him intimately witnessed a side that would shock the nation. According to testimonies from those close to the situation, Cleveland was a man of contradictions. By day, he projected an image of virtue and respectability. By night, he was frequently observed in states of extreme intoxication, engaging in what witnesses described as habitual immoral activities. One particularly damning account describes Cleveland arriving in Buffalo on a Saturday night during his time as governor, immediately proceeding to an infamous saloon where he met with three other men, procured significant amounts of alcohol, and relocated to apartment buildings where they arranged for women of ill repute to join them in debauchery that lasted through Sunday. But these were merely whispers compared to the storm that was brewing. The story I'm about to tell you involves a young woman whose life would intersect with Cleveland's in ways that would haunt them both forever. Her name was Maria Halpin, and by all accounts, she embodied everything that Victorian society valued in a young woman. Described as possessing beauty, virtue, and intelligence, Maria had secured employment at Flint and Kent, a prestigious firm run by respected merchants in Buffalo. She wasn't just any employee. She had worked her way up to head the cloak department, a position of responsibility and trust that she held with distinction for 2 to 3 years. Maria represented the ideal of the self-made woman in an era when such opportunities were rare. She was independent, capable, and respected by her employers and peers. Her future seemed bright, her reputation unblemished. But all of this would change when she caught the attention of Grover Cleveland. The exact circumstances of their meeting remain unclear, but what followed would destroy everything Maria had worked to build. Cleveland, using his position and charm, gradually gained her trust. What began as acquaintance evolved into something more intimate, something that would have devastating consequences for Maria's carefully constructed life. The seduction was methodical, calculated. Cleveland was a man who understood power dynamics, who knew how to exploit the vulnerability of a young woman trying to make her way in the world. When Maria finally succumbed to his advances, she could never have imagined the price she would pay. The consequences of Maria's relationship with Cleveland were swift and merciless. In an era when a woman's reputation was everything, Maria found herself cast out from respectable society. She lost her position at Flint and Kent, the job she had performed with such distinction. The doors of polite Buffalo society, once open to her, slammed shut. But Cleveland's betrayal went deeper than mere abandonment. Despite Maria's desperate pleas, he refused to honor what she claimed was his promise of marriage. Here was a man who would later be celebrated for his honesty and integrity, callously discarding a woman whose only crime was trusting him. Maria's situation became increasingly desperate as she realized she was carrying Cleveland's child. She found temporary refuge at Mrs. William Baker's residence on Genesee Street, just 5 blocks from Cleveland's own home. Mrs. Baker, who became Maria's confidant during this dark period, would later describe Maria as ladylike and intelligent, a testament to her character despite her circumstances. The psychological toll on Maria was immense. As winter turned to spring and her pregnancy advanced, she shared her emotional burdens with Mrs. Baker through long conversations. The isolation, the shame, the financial insecurity, all of it pressed down upon a woman who had once commanded respect in Buffalo's business community. On September 14, 1874, at St. Mary's Lying-in Hospital, Buffalo's sole facility for unmarried mothers, Maria gave birth to her son. The choice of hospital spoke volumes about her fall from grace. This was not the respectable maternity care afforded to married women of good standing, but rather the charity offered to society's outcasts. The child was named Oscar Folsom Cleveland, a name that would become central to the scandal that would later engulf Cleveland's presidential campaign. The middle name was particularly significant. Oscar Folsom was Cleveland's close friend and law partner, a choice Cleveland himself insisted upon, according to Mrs. Baker's testimony. Cleveland did take some responsibility for the practical aspects of the birth. He engaged Dr. James E. King, one of Buffalo's top obstetricians, ensuring that Maria received quality medical care. This gesture, however, was less about compassion and more about damage control. Cleveland was already thinking about how to manage this situation quietly. But the most revealing aspect of this entire episode was Cleveland's behavior regarding paternity. When Reverend Charles Avery of St. John's Episcopal Church confronted Cleveland about Maria's pregnancy, Cleveland admitted to his lapse in judgment, but immediately cast doubt on his fatherhood. He suggested that Maria had other paramours and had singled him out because he was unmarried, unlike the other men who were married. This calculated response reveals much about Cleveland's character. Rather than taking full responsibility, he was already crafting a narrative that would protect his reputation while casting aspersions on Maria's character. What happened next demonstrates the lengths to which Cleveland would go to protect his secret. The arrangement made for baby Oscar's care was elaborate and clandestine, involving multiple parties who were sworn to secrecy. Dr. James E. King arranged for the infant to be cared for by Mrs. Kendall, who lived on Union Street. The instructions were explicit. Mrs. Kendall was to tell no one where the child had been living if he were ever reclaimed. This wasn't merely discretion. This was a deliberate conspiracy to obscure the trail that might lead back to Cleveland. Mrs. Kendall cared for the child, whom she affectionately called Jack, for an entire year. During this time, she received mysterious items in the mail that spoke to the tragedy of the situation. Maria had knitted small cotton stockings for her son, along with notes that revealed her heartbreak and longing. Most dramatically, Mrs. Kendall received a knitted baby cap containing a small photograph with "Baby's Papa" scribbled on the back. The man in the photograph bore a striking resemblance to Grover Cleveland. The elaborate secrecy surrounding the child's care reveals Cleveland's deep fear that his connection to Oscar would be discovered. He understood instinctively that this secret had the power to destroy everything he was building. As Oscar grew, Maria's desperation intensified. She found herself increasingly isolated, with her threats toward Cleveland growing more frequent and more urgent. Cleveland's response to this problem would prove to be the most shocking aspect of the entire scandal. In a move that demonstrates the depth of his callousness, Cleveland enlisted 2 detectives and what sources describe as a disreputable doctor to solve his Maria Halpin problem permanently. Their plan was as cruel as it was calculated. They would separate Maria from her child and have her committed to an asylum under the false pretense of insanity. The execution of this plan was brutal. Despite Maria's protests and physical resistance, the detectives forcibly removed her from her residence, dragging her to a carriage while she screamed in protest. She was then transported to the Providence Asylum on Main Street, while young Oscar was simultaneously taken to the Buffalo Orphan Asylum. Cleveland paid the detectives $50 for this service, a detail that underscores his direct involvement in this unconscionable act. Fortunately for Maria, Dr. William Ring, the respected visiting physician at Providence Asylum, examined the new inmate and immediately declared her completely sane. Recognizing that there were no legal grounds for her commitment, the asylum authorities allowed her to leave of her own accord. This episode reveals Cleveland at his absolute worst, a man willing to use his connections and resources to have an inconvenient woman declared insane and institutionalized simply because she demanded he take responsibility for their child. Maria's escape from the asylum marked the beginning of her fight to reclaim her son. With the determination that only a mother's love can fuel, she immediately secured legal representation and began pursuing the recovery of Oscar from the Buffalo Orphan Asylum. Her attorney advised her to retrieve her child by any necessary means, and Maria followed this advice literally. In a dramatic turn, she successfully retrieved Oscar and fled with him, with no one intervening to stop her. This act of maternal courage temporarily reunited mother and child, but Cleveland was not finished with his machinations. Negotiations ensued, with Cleveland ultimately paying Maria $500 in exchange for custody of the child. This wasn't child support or assistance, this was a buyout. Cleveland was purchasing his son and Maria's silence. The arrangement also included Maria's agreement to leave Buffalo, effectively banishing her from the only community she had ever known. Young Oscar was then placed with a family on Niagara Street, where he would grow up under their name, his true parentage hidden from the world. Maria Halpin disappeared into obscurity, heartbroken and marginalized, as the historical record states, while Cleveland continued his ascent in politics. The complexity of Cleveland's cover up operation reveals the extent of his concern about this secret. Dr. James E. King played a crucial role, not just in Oscar's birth, but in the elaborate arrangements for his care and the eventual separation from his mother. The involvement of respected physicians lent legitimacy to what was essentially a conspiracy to hide Cleveland's paternity. Mrs. Kendall's experience provides a window into how this network operated. The instructions to keep the child's location secret, the circuitous carriage route designed to disorient her when Oscar was returned to Maria, the emphasis on discretion. All of these details point to a well-orchestrated plan to maintain Cleveland's deniability. The financial arrangements also tell a story. Cleveland paid for Maria's medical care during pregnancy and birth, compensated the detectives who forced her into the asylum, and ultimately paid for custody of his son. These weren't acts of generosity, but rather investments in his political future. Perhaps most tellingly, Cleveland chose to name the child after his close friend Oscar Folsom. This wasn't sentiment, but strategy. By associating the child's name with someone else, Cleveland created another layer of plausible deniability should questions ever arise. For years, this secret remained buried, known only to the small circle of people directly involved. Cleveland's political career flourished. He served as mayor of Buffalo, then governor of New York, building a reputation for reform and integrity. But secrets have a way of surfacing at the most inconvenient times. The year 1884 brought Cleveland to the threshold of the presidency. The Democratic Party had nominated him as their candidate, largely based on his reputation for honesty and good government. His opponent was James G. Blaine, a Republican with his own ethical issues, including corrupt dealings with railroad interests. McVeigh and other reformers had expected the election to center on character and integrity. They got their wish, but not in the way they had anticipated. In July 1884, a statement was signed and dated, with details of the Maria Halpin affair carefully documented. Just 3 days later, on July 21st, the Evening Telegraph published an explosive headline, "A terrible tale, a dark chapter in a public man's history." The revelation created a nationwide sensation. The story of Maria Halpin and Oscar Folsom Cleveland spread across the country, turning Cleveland's reputation for integrity into a liability. Public inquiries flooded into Buffalo, with citizens demanding answers from church leaders, editors, and prominent citizens who might know the truth about these allegations. The political ramifications were immediate and severe. Republicans seized upon the scandal with gleeful abandon, creating what would become one of the most memorable campaign slogans in American political history. "Ma, ma, where's my pa?" The chant followed Cleveland wherever he went, a constant reminder of his secret shame. The Democrats, not to be outdone, highlighted Blaine's corrupt dealings with the railroads. Joseph Pulitzer used his cartoonists to routinely ridicule Blaine on the front page of the New York World, creating a campaign that descended into what observers called farce. Henry Adams, a Blaine detractor, captured the absurdity of the situation perfectly when he stated, "When I am not angry, I can do nothing but laugh." Here were two candidates for the highest office in the land, each trying to prove the other was more corrupt than himself. The scandal transformed what should have been Cleveland's greatest strength, his reputation for honesty, into his greatest vulnerability. How could a man who had forcibly committed the mother of his child to an asylum, who had paid to separate a mother from her son, who had bought his way out of paternal responsibility, claim to be a paragon of virtue? Despite the scandal, Cleveland managed to navigate the political storm. His campaign strategy was neither to fully deny nor fully admit the allegations. Instead, they focused attention on Blaine's documented corruption, effectively turning the election into a choice between personal impropriety and public corruption. The American people, it seemed, were more willing to forgive private moral failings than public theft. Cleveland won the election, becoming the 22nd president of the United States, but the victory came at enormous cost, both to his own reputation and to the lives he had destroyed in protecting his secret. Oscar Folsom Cleveland grew up under an assumed name, his true parentage hidden from him and the world. Maria Halpin remained in exile, her life forever scarred by her encounter with a man who valued his political ambitions more than human decency. The case raises profound questions about power, privilege, and the price of political ambition. Cleveland had used every advantage at his disposal, his legal connections, his financial resources, even the medical establishment, to cover up his responsibility and silence an inconvenient woman. The Cleveland Halpin affair represents more than just a political scandal. It's a window into the dark side of Gilded Age America, where powerful men could destroy lives with impunity while maintaining facades of respectability. Maria Halpin's story is particularly tragic because she represents countless women whose lives were destroyed by powerful men who faced no consequences for their actions. She was educated, capable, and independent, exactly the kind of woman who should have been able to make her way in the world. Instead, her encounter with Cleveland cost her everything: her career, her reputation, her child, and ultimately her place in society. The elaborate cover up reveals the extent to which Cleveland feared exposure. This wasn't a youthful indiscretion that he simply preferred to keep private. This was a systematic campaign to hide evidence of his paternity and destroy anyone who threatened to expose him. Perhaps most disturbing is the medical conspiracy involved in Maria's commitment to the asylum. The willingness of doctors and law enforcement to participate in this fraud shows how easily institutions could be corrupted when powerful men needed to solve their problems. The scandal also highlights the double standards of the era. While Cleveland's behavior was deplorable, the public's ultimate willingness to overlook it in favor of his opponent's financial corruption suggests that private morality was considered less important than public honesty, a calculation that seems cynical by today's standards. Behind the political maneuvering and campaign slogans were real people whose lives were forever changed by this scandal. Oscar Folsom Cleveland grew up not knowing his true father, raised by strangers under an assumed name. The psychological impact of such deception on a child cannot be measured, but it represents one of the most cruel aspects of Cleveland's cover-up. Maria Halpin paid the highest price of all. A woman who had worked her way to a position of responsibility and respect found herself cast out, impoverished, and separated from her child. Her desperate attempts to hold Cleveland accountable were met with increasing cruelty, culminating in the unconscionable Asylum episode. The conspiracy required the silence and cooperation of numerous people: doctors, lawyers, caretakers, and civic officials. That so many were willing to participate in this deception speaks to Cleveland's power and influence, but also to the casual cruelty with which society treated women who stepped outside prescribed boundaries. Mrs. Kendall's experience as Oscar's temporary caregiver illustrates another dimension of the tragedy. She formed a genuine bond with the child she called Jack, only to have him suddenly removed from her care without explanation. The secretive manner of his transfer, designed to prevent her from maintaining any connection to the child, shows how Cleveland's desire for secrecy created additional victims. The Cleveland scandal raises fundamental questions about character and leadership that remain relevant today. How should private behavior factor into assessments of public fitness? Can someone who acts ruthlessly in personal matters be trusted with public responsibility? Cleveland's defenders might argue that his presidential record vindicated the voters' choice. He did indeed prove to be an honest and effective president. But this perspective ignores the human cost of his path to power and the methods he used to protect his political viability. The contrast between Cleveland's public image and private behavior was stark. He built his political career on a reputation for integrity and reform, yet his treatment of Maria Halpin and their son revealed a capacity for cruelty that seems incompatible with genuine virtue. Perhaps most troubling is the calculated nature of Cleveland's deception. This wasn't a moment of poor judgment followed by genuine remorse and responsibility. Instead, it was a systematic campaign to avoid consequences while destroying anyone who threatened his secret. The scandal also reveals the limitations of contemporary journalism and political accountability. While the Evening Telegraph eventually exposed the truth, Cleveland had managed to keep his secret for a decade, during which time he rose to the governorship of New York. The systems that should have held him accountable failed Maria Halpin when she needed them most. The story of Grover Cleveland and Maria Halpin is ultimately a story about the price of unchecked ambition and the vulnerability of those without power. Cleveland's rise to the presidency came at the cost of a woman's life and a child's identity, casualties in a war they never knew they were fighting. The scandal that nearly derailed Cleveland's path to the presidency ultimately could not stop him, but it should have. The American people in 1884 made a choice to overlook private corruption in favor of public honesty, a decision that speaks to the moral complexities of democratic leadership. Whether that choice was right or wrong, we are left with the haunting legacy of Maria Halpin and the child who grew up never knowing his true father. Casualties in the ruthless pursuit of political power. But the question still lurks. In our evaluation of leaders, how much weight should we give to the Maria Halpins of the world? The people damaged by those who seek to lead us. Their stories, too often untold, may be the truest measure of character we have. Get access to the full story and the aftermath of the scandal that shook America, exclusively on Scoob. Download the app now from App Store or Play Store and know more about Cleveland's illegitimate child.